Welcome to lesson 4. The first item on lesson number 4 is all about continuous wall footings. The majority of our detailing work are schools, small warehouses, and light commercial stores. This type of work are for the most part, are masonry walls or light concrete walls, which requires continuous wall footings. Let us examine a few jobs and check out the continuous footings. On South Fair Oaks Avenue job, we will see in here the continuous wall footings were all used around the perimeter of the building. This is the lower basement slab floor. They're basically used to support the basement perimeter walls, and some of the continuous footings are used in the ramp walls, in the stairway walls, and the elevators. So basically the continuous wall footings is around the perimeter, the ramp, the stairways, and the elevator. Now let's examine another job. This job is the March Air Force Base control tower. The complex is so large it required two set of foundation plan, the first area and another area. You could see here on this particular job the continuous wall footings is all over the place, around the perimeter, inside, quite a bit inside, and in the other area you see them. Here is an exterior yard with a retaining wall or a freestanding wall. They're all masonry out here, and continuous wall footings is used there. Continuous wall footing surrounding here, all over the place, like that. And the control tower itself is just this area here, just this small area. In the control tower, the foundation is a big mat foundation, but outside that it's all just column pads, small column pads, and continuous wall footings. Now, continuous wall footings is not, of course, limited to the type of work we do mostly. We get them also on large jobs, high-rise buildings. Let's examine one of them. The Aura Towers is a job that we're doing in Canada. It's several floors underground and several stories above ground. See we'll examine the continuous wall footings as used in this particular job. Here is the lowest elevation of the basement, and here again you see the continuous wall footings is around the perimeter. They're in the interior, spanning the exterior wall and a big large column pad and into a big mat foundation which supports the main tower core, the elevator core and the stairway core. Here's another continuous wall footing that spans a big pad and the big mat foundation. So these are all the continuous footings. So continuous footings is of course used in every concrete structure. The one thing that I notice when I'm doing continuous wall footings is the type of continuous footings that are used in a particular job are very, very few. For example, we look at this one, this particular job, the continuous wall footing that was used is typical on this line, on this line, on this line, and on this line. Even inside, the type used like in this case SF1 across here, and SF1 and SF1 again across the other side. And here's another SF1 spanning two column pads. So they're very few, because basically the reinforcing on a continuous footing is pretty simple. The one I'm going to demonstrate to you is the South Pair Oaks. So let's go back to South Pair Oaks and see what South Pair Oaks is. We're going back to South Pair Oaks. Here you can see on South Pair Oaks, this section, this continuous wall footings is shown on 1 on S502. Same thing here along this line, 1 S502 is used. Along this line is 1 S502 is used. Here along this line, you will see 1 S502 is used again. In fact, even when they don't use the same section as this, like in this case, or along this line, as a new section was introduced, 1 on S105. Examining both sections, you will see that they're similar. So basically, continuous wall footing, they're practically all the same. Sometimes the only difference is the wall dowels. One wall might be a 12-inch wall, and another set might be just a 10-inch wall. So the only thing that is different is the size and spacing of the wall dowels. But basically the reinforcing for the continuous footing are almost always practically the same. So, and I'm trying to show that because in detailing the continuous wall footings, in essence, I could just detail one continuous footing, and I will accumulate and take the total length of all the walls and detail that particular total length. If I had like 400 linear feet of wall, I would just detail 400 linear feet of wall. The problem is if I go and use 30-foot stocks, each line will have a different remnant or a piece other than 30s. Like this one will have a different remnant piece. This one is also another one. So the other thing about continuous wall footing, you could practically identify them by line. Say line 7 continuous footing, or line 1 continuous footing, line G or continuous footing. So you could identify them by line. In case of March Air Force Base, when it's all over the place, you could put a mark on it. If the continuous footing is say CF1, you could say CF1A, CF1B, CF1C, CF1D, and detail all of them. Let's see the section on this particular building. Here, they're saying the continuous footing is 3'6" wide, 16 inches thick, with 4 number 5 continuous top and bottom. 4 number 5 continuous top and bottom, and then just the dowels. And then there's a slab dowel that goes like that. But basically you got wall dowels, the continuous footing, and these slab dowels. That's all it's involved. If this happens to be number 4, you could actually elect to just send stock bars 30s for the entire building. Send enough 30-footers, and they can cut whatever piece they need to complete a line out of that stock. Just make sure you have enough stock. In number 4s, some iron worker would rather cut those bars rather than look for the remnant piece to make a line. For example, we have a series of 30-30, and then the last piece is a 10-footer. Rather than look for a 10-footer, they'd rather cut a stock length. Sometimes that is also true to number 5. But the safest bet is to detail them by line if the bars are greater than number 4. So in this case, for number 5, I will detail this one line at a time. It doesn't hurt though to ask the customer if stock bars would be sufficient to detail, rather than cutting those bars into the actual lengths they needed. So when I'm detailing this, here's what I come up with. I'm demonstrating again the detailing as I used to do them a long time ago. And this time for a continuous wall footing, this is what I have. So I will say continuous footing line 1. So I will identify the continuous footing by line. So on line 1, these are and the detail that I use is 1 on S502, just like the section shows. This is the actual section on the contract drawings, and I have another section 3 on S502 also. So both of these pertains to the continuous footing along line 1. And my first item would be continuous top bars. We had 4 runs of that. Because it's top bars, the lap dimension is 40 inches. So I have 24 number 530, which means it took 6 bars per run. 6 times 4 is 24 and 530. The last remnant piece is 4 number 5 6'2" that will make up the total length. That's for the top bar. The bottom bar, I start again, 20 number 530. This time I only took 5 30-foot stock to make a run, and the remnant piece at the end is 4 number 5 29-foot miles, much longer. And this is all because the lap is only 31 as opposed to the top, which is 40 inches. Then I have the corner bars. If I have a continuous line, I will only take care of the corner bar at the right. The left side will be taken care of as I close the wall. So I'm always taking care of the corners at the right. So in my putting on one line, I only have one corner, and then that's on the right. So I have 4 number 5, mark 5B1, type 17, and then another 4 number 5 for the bottom. Then I will take care of all the column dowels that is along that line. Just like the column pies that I had, I will have 7-2, which says 7 bars on the north and south face, 2 intermediate dowels on the east and west face, and then the template ties. If I have another set of column, and I identify where they are, it's from along line 1 at grids B to F. At grids A-1, the first set, I have 24 number 11 dowels, and here are the template ties. And then when I'm done with the column dowels, I will end up with the wall dowels at 12 inches outside face, and then at 8 inch inside face. These are all my dowels. And my dowels, my spacing is per the CRSI. I do not have a dowel where the columns are. So my dowels is spaced from column to column. Then, if you remember the section just shows 4 number 5 continuous top and bottom with no means to support the top. I will add a standee, and here's how I do the standee. And I make a little section of it because it wasn't shown on the drawing. I will create a type X6 bar, S6, which is, if I highlight them, it will look like that. It goes up, like that, it goes up, and like that. And I use a number 4 bars at 48 inches on center. And the main purpose of this is just to support those bars, because without the means of support, my iron worker will have a hard time placing them. So that is in addition to what the drawing shows. That's what I will have. The other thing I'm looking at is when I'm doing the dowels, I make sure my legs fits the width of the continuous footings. If I make the leg longer than the width, then they won't be able to use it. If it's short, still they won't be able to use it. It has to be always right. So sometimes the continuous footing is so narrow that a standard bend will not fit. So I will reduce that. I always make sure that the bars, the dimensions that are used, can go inside the wall footing. I make sure I have the right clearances. The clearance is 3 inches at the bottom, 3 inches on the sides. If this is formed, this will be 2 inches. The top is always 2 inches. The top is never formed. After they bury this in dirt, then it's exposed to dirt. So I make that a 2-inch clearance. That's always shown in the drawing. That takes care of my continuous footings. But in a continuous footing, there are items that I look for also. For example, I look for step footings. Let's go back to the drawing. Let's see if I have, go back to that. Let's examine what happened in this project, South Fair Oaks. Okay, here's the South Fair Oaks again. Here's the foundation plan. And if we examine it, we will see that on certain location there are step footings. There's a step footing here. There's a step footing here. And the reason there's a step footing there is because this elevator pit is much lower than the other elevations. So in order to drop down into the top of footing elevation of the elevator pit, this continuous wall footing has to step down. And so I look at any spot that has a step footing, and I count them. So there are no more. This is lower. See if there's any continuous step footing there. There's no step footing there. So anywhere that there's a step footing, I look at that. And then I look for the typical section of a step footing. A step footing looks like this. It says H, 1.6 max. So it climbs up 1.6 max. So that's maximum. So as long as they're within 1.6, they could start climbing it. So the problem with the step footing is first, the actual location is almost always not clearly identified on the footings, because they leave it up to the contractor to find out where the most feasible place to put the step footing, and they will step footing it like this. But then another thing is you do not know if they will all have the same height throughout, or some will have smaller heights like this. On the typical is H. So what I do, I make one typical detail like this, and sometimes what on this particular detail, my problem is this bar goes up, bends, and then it bends again. So it's got 2 bends. If they dug this different than what I assume, then my bars won't fit. All I know is the top elevation of this, at this side, the top elevation of the very top here. I know that. But I do not know exactly how long L will be. It depends on how they dug it. And how high H will be on all these steps. So sometimes what I end up doing to protect myself is, instead of detailing it like so, I will detail this a little bit longer, like so, and have them bend it in the field. I'm allowed to do that. I could bend it at the bottom and extend it a little bit much longer, and then they could just bend it in the field. I will just make sure that I have this piece, and this is pretty much same. I will have those L bars. I have enough of all the bars. I have enough of the dowels. And remember, my dowels at the step pulling will be a little longer because of this deeper portion, unlike the ones in the typical section. So my dowels, whenever there's a step pulling, I will have enough that is quite longer. I will try and make them all the same. I will not try and figure out exactly where each steps are. So this is how I do my steps. The other thing I look for is, in a continuous pulling, I watch where a pipe will cross the pullings. When a pipe crosses a pulling, what happens is the step pulling is brought down like this. A certain amount of concrete is brought down. And sometimes this will require a rebar that is shaped like this. I don't know if you can see this, an added rebar. Some detail will show that. In this particular case, no, because it's a basement. Very few pipes crosses it. So those are the things I look for in a continuous pullings. Steps where pipes are crossing it, the corner details, and I'll show you the drawings that I have for all this. I think I'll show it to you in CAD. Here's my step. I have all those corner bars. I have a longer dowel at the steps, and my bars is continuous, and I have them bended in the field like that. That's for the step pullings. Here's my section on bars like that. And then I show a detail of the corner, how I treat the corner bars on a continuous pullings that are just straight through, continuous pulling all around like that. I have a corner bar. I prefer a corner bar rather than bending the continuous bars. When the pulling is crossing big column pads, you don't need to run it through and through. All you need is to put an embedment length into the column pad, so short pieces like that. So you have dowels in the pullings and also dowels, wall dowels that goes into the extent of the column pads. But the rebar, the continuous bar, doesn't go through and through. It just goes extend a certain distance. It could be a lap distance or an embedment distance. And the lap length and the embedment length is usually shown on the drawing. When I have a pipe crossing it, I will have this detail. I will have an extra tie to take care of that, or a trim bars. It might be just it could be an S3 type bar or just a vertical bar, and I will have this continuous bars part, whatever the continuous bars here, I match that with this one, pipe sleeve. And also, if there are transverse bars, I have to make sure the transverse bars really agree with the section. If the continuous pulling has long and short of the same size and the same spacing, then my transverse bars will be only beginning at the inside corner here, there, inside corner. Nothing at the intersection itself. No transverse bars in the intersection, mainly because they're the same bars and the same spacing. The longitudinal bars becomes my transverse bars at the intersection. Like in this case, I do not have a transverse bars because the continuous longitudinal bars becomes the transverse. However, if they're not of the same size and the same spacing, if the longitudinal is a number 4 bars while the transverse is a number 5, then I will end up with the transverse going all the way to the intersection. Like in this case, instead of just stopping at the inside face, I go all the way to the wall. I do not go beyond the wall because that is not how the section will look. The section will look in particular right smack in the middle of the wall here. So I have transverse bars there, I have transverse bars here. If the longitudinal and transverse bars are not of the same size and same spacing, this is how I treat them. So be careful when you're doing continuous putting. Make sure you take this into consideration. So these are all the things that I do in continuous putting. First, you have a section. This is how you treat step putting. Sometimes if you're not sure where their locations are, do not bother to calculate the exact length of your continuous bars. Just make sure you have enough continuous bar. For example, if I have a continuous bar that crosses this particular step putting that is 30 feet, I will give an additional 30 foot to take care of the bars that goes in here. In the event that it moves, in the event that it's like a little distance away from where I assumed it. I don't know if you understand that. Let me see if I could explain that a little better. Supposing I assume that there's a step putting here, and this piece of bar is 20 feet. There's a step putting there. If the step putting was not there and was instead placed here, let me go back. If I assume there's a step, if the drawing shows that there's a step putting here, and I try to detail it correctly, then I'll have, say, a 10 foot on this side and a 12 foot on that side. So I have a 10 and a 12 foot, a total of 22 foot bar. I have a step putting here. That will work if the step putting that they dug is exactly at that point. I'll have 12, whatever here. But what if instead of that location, the actual step putting that they dug was out here, closer to then the 12 foot one that I did here won't work. It'll be too short because now it moved to the right. So the better way to detail it is just get the total length and add a splice. If this happens to be 20 feet, I'll say 20 feet plus 2 feet. So I send them a 22 foot bar. They could move that step putting anywhere and cut the bars. And there will always be, there's an extra 2 feet that they could work on. So rather than detail it, I will just get the total length. And that's what I will send. I'll send that. And I will add even 1 splice or 2 splice to it. So instead of 20, I might send 22 feet or 24 feet. This way, they could put the step putting anywhere they want. And when the extra bar that is on a diagonal climb like that, I'll just make sure that it's continuous and they could bend it at the top like so. That's what I meant. Make sure any bars continuous bars that is crossing a step putting, you have enough length into it. If there are 2 steps, add 2 more splice. If there are 3 steps, add 3 additional splice to the length of the bar. And send them 1 piece, and they can cut that anywhere they want to. Because you are never sure where the step putting is. It's hard. Some drawings are are very accurate. The engineers will identify exactly where the step putting he wants. He'll put a distance, he'll put a dimension. There you could rely on that. But most of the time, it doesn't really show where the exact location is. So I look for step putting, I take care of this situation, I take care of this situation, I take care of that situation. And then of course, the other one is make sure you take care of this situation where bars of the same size, same spacing, it's like this. Bars of different size and spacing, where they're different, you take care of this. You have transverse bars at the intersection. That is how I do continuous wall puttings. It's pretty simple. And again, you could make, if I go back to the detailing, you can make a key plan showing all your continuous putting, putting a subscript to continuous puttings. You could put a subscript, you could identify them by line, continuous putting 1, continuous putting 2, continuous putting 3. And all you have is a typical drawings. In the Serial 97, there's a way to put a designated mark on all these lines. So instead of calling the drawings by quantity, by size, and by mark, you could identify each one A, B, C, D, like that. I think I showed that to you before. So this is continuous wall putting. Wall dowels and the continuous puttings in the United States, the ends, the top ends, they put a plastic cap on it, a rounded plastic cap, the top end. On all those dowels, they put a top. It's a plastic cap, it's a rounded plastic cap at every top. Right. And that is a fall protection. In case someone working above falls, the cap will protect him from being impaled by the rebar. So it's a requirement by OSHA. That's the Occupational Safety and Hazard. I don't think they do this in the Philippines, but in the United States, this is required. You cannot just leave the dowels out exposed like this. Sometimes what they do, they put a lumber, like a 2x8 lumber. They put it on top continuously. Put that on top to protect the thing. So anyone working above, if they fall, they're not going to be impaled by the rebar. One smart guy, an engineer, a young engineer, had a bright idea. And he said, well, instead of having the dowels, wall dowels sticking out like this, why not put a 180-degree bend on it, like that? Okay. By doing that, they do not need the plastic cap. The problem with the plastic cap, any kids on weekends playing around very close to the job site, sometimes they go in the job site when no one is looking and they remove those caps. They use those caps, they use it as toy, they, I don't know what they use it for, but they play with it, so they remove the caps. This way they cannot remove it. And so when you see a detailing that has a 180-degree hook like this, that is for fall protection from OSHA. So that anyone working above and he falls, accidentally falls, he will not be impaled by the rebar. That is the only purpose of that. So I like to bring that out because you never see that on drawings, but that's an idea that is common in the United States. The other thing which I mentioned before also, I believe, consider that when you're doing continuous wall puttings, and then continuous puttings crosses column pads, make sure you have a longer dowel when each is at the column pad, because usually the column pads is much deeper than the continuous wall footings. Do not make them all the same length, or they may not be able to use it. So be aware that certain part of the foundation might be deeper than the rest. For example, in the step footings, that portion is deeper, so you need a longer dowel on it. The other things I consider when I'm doing continuous wall footings is sometimes in a series of continuous footings, one dowel might be 4 foot 2, another one 4 foot 3, another one 4 foot 5. Well, sometimes I will decide to just make them all the same. I will use the longer one and make them all 4 foot 5 vertical length instead of 4 foot 2, 4 foot 4, 4 foot 5, because it's easier to find bars in a large bundle than bars in a smaller bundle. So the faster they could find it, the faster they could install it. And those 2 or 4 inches really won't matter so much. So those are some of the tricks that I do, and that makes me faster. All these drawings will be made available to you, and you could sort them out also. So these are some of the things I consider when I'm doing continuous wall footings. Make sure the dowels is right height. You have sometimes 180. If they ask for it, the contractor will have to ask for it. Otherwise, it will just be sent like this, because those 180 degree will increase the weight of the rebar, and it might overshift because of that. So only when they ask for it. The next item in this lesson 4 are grade beams or tie beams. I do the detailing on grade beams and tie beams by relying on stick diagram. Here is how I do it. I rely on stick diagram. You notice instead of describing it, I'm illustrating it using stick diagram. I have grid in this case here. I have grid A showing the center line of grid A, center line of grid B. Here I will say 4 Mark 10 C1 top, and I will have 2 Mark 10 C2 on each end of the span. 2 Mark 10 C2. And each of these stick diagrams lines up with my callouts on the detailing callouts. For example, in this case, I have 2 beams, G1, 2 of them, 2. First line is 4 of them, Mark 10 C1, and I will show the dimensions A and B, and then G. I will show G also. There's G dimension. And on the second line, I'll have 2 bars on each end, Mark 10 C2. I will have that. I will have the mark, and I'll have the dimensions again also. And then right below the stick diagram, I have this 10 foot. These dimensions are called endos. Endos, E-N-D-O-S, endos. And what it means is the distance from the end of the bar to the grid line. So if you look at the dimensions of 10C2, it shows 10C2 is type 2, 1 foot 10 standard bend, 11 foot 9. Which means, if you look at the stick diagram, there's 10 foot to the right of the grid line A and 1 foot 9 to the left of grid line A. So in order to demonstrate endos, because sometimes you might have bars of different endos, one would be 10 foot, one would be 12 foot. So it's a good idea to get endos. Endos is also used when you're crossing a bar. For example, you have 2 span on a grade beam, and you have a straight bar, say a 20-foot bar. But one span is greater than the other span. Now, to demonstrate how to place a straight bar, an intermediate straight bar on top of interior support, you use an endo. But if you say 8, if the bar is 20 foot and you say 8 foot endo to the left, that means the right would have a 12 foot endo. You know, if you don't have an endo, it's understood that the bar is right centered on the grid line. But if you have an endo, they have to make sure that the end of the bar to the center line of the grid line matches that of the endos. So the endos is used this way. And then I continue on with the stick diagram with showing the bottom bars. And then after that, I go back to descriptive again, stirrups of 12, caps of 12. This is basically the thing on detailing beams, grade beams, tie beams. Sometimes I have a situation like this in LAX, the job in LAX right now, International Airport, and I utilize a drawing. Make a drawing. Once I make the drawing, I have the bar list that matches the drawing. Here, all of a sudden, the engineer decided to put a die beam to tie all these caissons. There's 3 caissons, 1 caisson here, 1 caisson there, 1 caisson there, and here is a wall. But the caissons are already poured, the walls is already poured, and they want to put a tie beam. So what they did was they needed number 8 9-foot dowels, which they will drill and grout into place, into the caissons. Drill and grout, drill and grout. Here again, drill and grout. Here, drill and grout. You know. So I have all those 3 number 8 9-foot top bar and 3 number 8 6-foot 9 bottom dowel. They're of different length because of the splices for the top and splices for the bottom are not the same. And then all I had was a continuous bar from face to face. So in this case, on this span, I have 6 number 8 24-foot 4, 3 on top, 3 at the bottom, 6 number 8 18-foot on here, 3 on top, 3 on bottom. So a simple diagram took care of this type of detailing. So I have that. And then I matches all that with a bar list. So I have, you could use a stick diagram, or you could draw it in a plan view. So, and here I will have a section to demonstrate to them that I'm using so I could point out where I have the type S3 tie, and then the cap and the clearances on all 4 sides of the tie beam. This is what I use for detailing this. Grade beams, to go back, let's show you again a few drawings on grade beams. Some of the details that we need to be concerned about on grade beams. Back to the first, and let's slide down and see where you have 2 crossing grade beams. You have to decide which one goes over. Like in this case, this is like a girder and a beam. Sometimes this situation happens also on a grade beam, where one grade beam goes north-south, another grade beam goes east-west. Of course, since rebar is an immovable object, you need to decide early on, and the drawing sometimes shows it, sometimes not, that one bar will be on top of the other bar. Like in this case, this bar going east-west is on top of the bars going north-south. The situation is, at the bottom, they all have the same clearance, 3 inches. What happened is, the one crossing sometimes is draped, not dogleg, but just drape at the bottom, like so. The one on top is really on top, so this bar goes down. But the clearance of these north-south bars and the clearance of these east-west bars are the same to the bottom, because one is draped over. Unlike the one on top, the clearance of the east-west is much closer to the edge than the one going north-south, because the north-south dropped down, because the east-west beam, grade beam bars goes on top. So you have to make an early decision on that. If you're lucky if the drawing shows you which one goes on top or which one goes underneath. But if you don't, you have to make a decision, because this rebar is an immovable object. You cannot make the tie the same way, same dimension, or otherwise you're going to have some problem. Tie beams are sometimes delayed poured. You know, they pour the pile caps or the foundation column pad first, and then because they're not as deep as the column pad, it's much easier to delay this, pour the and just provide dowels. The dowels belongs to the pad, and then you come back and do the tie beam. That's pretty much a tie beam and a grade beam type deal. The other consideration on tie beams, if I have that, I may not have it, but I could demonstrate it and show it to you. Let's go back to my CAD. Use the CAD to demonstrate. Okay. Here's that situation. You have a grade beam, and the drawing clearly showed that the top bars is spliced at the top and the bottom bars are spliced in the middle. Using a stick diagram, you could have something like that. You could now put a type on all this and match it with your, you could use a typical drawing such as this and put designated symbols. For example, I could say that, oh, okay, it's this one, and we'll use a circle, and we'll use, okay, this would be the A bar, oops, first, okay, I'll say, sometimes I will use a typical diagram of a grade beam, and I will say, these are my type A's, so my type A's are always on the left top support on the exterior span, and this will be my type B's, and this will be my type C's. You know, so you could make something like this, and then you will have a type D. That takes care of your exterior span. Now, if I have if I also have interior span, I will make another line and I will call that interior span. That would be my type E. Then I could reuse B and C, and so something like this. If you only have single spans, you could say my type A's are this on a single span, and the bottom would be a type B. So now when you detail, rather than use a stick diagram, you have designate, this is A, to number 10, so and so. This is B, to number 6, so and so. You know, so you're detailing it by types based on your typical drawings. Now, as I said earlier, the drawing showed very clearly break. Sometimes on grade beams, the position of the splices is reversed. For example, in some grade beams, the bottom bar is spliced at the mid-span, and the top bar is spliced at the support, which is a reverse of a beam. And that situation almost always occur when you have a situation where the grade beams is supporting walls and is spanning two columns. For example, you have a situation like this. Let me see if I could draw it. Level 24. You have a continuous grade beam, and there's a column there and a column there, and then in between there's a thick wall. There's a wall, right? Okay. Sometimes, based on the design of the engineer finds that the stresses are being applied are actually the soil pressure. So it's the soil pressure pushing it up, and it tends for the beam to act in reverse. So the rebar is now in reverse. Rather than the weight of the structure, is the soil pressure that is pushing it up. When that happens, the rebar is treated like this. The rebar now is treated with a right angle bend there, and it's spliced there. Oops, and the bottom, the top one is right straight. Because the concrete tends to break at the top of the concrete rather than when this pressure is pushing up. Now the concrete tends to be take this shape. So now the concrete goes like this, cracks like that. So you could see tension is at the very top, compression is at the very bottom of the grade beam. Now, how will a detailer determine if this scenario occurs in his project? A detailer can't. The engineer will have to tell us. The engineer will have to describe exactly which of this grade beam has this reaction, because we did not do the calculations, and this is not shown on the construction drawing. The drawings will have to identify exactly and show us how to splice all those bars. Otherwise, it is treated like an ordinary beam, where the top bar is spliced at the midspan and the bottom bar is spliced at the... In cases like that, it's the applied weight, applied pressure that is tending to bend the grade beam. But there's occasion where it's that earth pressure applied up that tends to put the concrete like this, where tension is at the very top, compression at the very bottom. That is the same reasoning on column pads. For example, column pads are like this. Like you have a column. Why do they put the rebar at the bottom? Put the rebar at the bottom because they're expecting pressure from the soil pressure pushing up, which makes it like a cantilevered effect. The tension is at this edge. Tension is at this edge, like a cantilever. The soil pressure is pushing this bar down, up like that. You know, it's tending to push it up. That's why they need the rebar at the bottom, not at the top. At the top, it's compression. The concrete is being pushed inward. At the bottom, the concrete tends to break like this. So the concrete tends to break like so. It cracks there like that. So it's pushing it up. That's why they needed the rebar at the very bottom to prevent that. That's what's happening. So on column pad, it's the earth pressure pushing up. You know, because of the applied weight going down here, the pressure pushing up on the side tends to have a cantilevered effect on this. You know, that's why the bars are placed at the very bottom. Same thing on a grade beam. This sometimes happens where the bottom is in compression, the top of the grade beam is under tension. So if it's under tension, you cannot put a splice there. it's the weakest point. So that is situations that you have to watch. But basic detailing is easy, relying on just stick diagram. Just strictly stick diagram will get you by in detailing it. That's it for lesson 4. See you on lesson 5. Thank you. Bye.